Story 1. It made me take a passive role in my own life, and I finally decided that while I enjoyed smoking, it wasn't serving my growth as a person. Story 2. I used it to cope with past negative experiences while overlooking life's positive moments. Now I face my suffering directly. Story 3. I had the realization that when I smoked daily, I was sitting on the couch watching my life pass me by. The real kicker was that when I was high, I was perfectly fine with that. Story 4. I work in the technology field, and we recently had an all-staff quarterly meeting. Some colleagues were so well-spoken and sounded so smart that I felt I was falling behind because my daily cannabis use was not helping me grow. Others seemed to be excelling while I felt stuck in the mud and groggy every day. Story 5. I'm not sure what happened, but one day I had a panic attack while I was high. Now I become very anxious whenever I smoke. It is not enjoyable at all. Story 6. After years of smoking, I realized I did not even like it anymore. It made me feel terrible and lazy. As I have seen others say, the worst part is that it makes you feel fine sitting there doing nothing with your time while your life passes you by. Story 7. Anxiety, sluggishness, and forgetfulness made me a real bum and left me dependent on it. Story 8. It made me very paranoid and antisocial. After I stopped, I noticed that my friends who continued were also somewhat paranoid and antisocial, so I do not regret stopping. Some people seem less affected, but it affects everyone to some degree. Story 9. The insufferable panic attacks that randomly started happening every time I smoked lasted for 3 fucking days afterward. Story 10. I was using it with a lot of other substances, mainly cocaine, and decided that was not good. I am 25 days clean. Story 11. The good. Weed was a turning point for me because it forced me to finally address some deeply buried thoughts. Questions like, who am I? What am I doing with my life? And why do I feel so worthless sometimes? This self-reflection led me to switch majors and take on challenges I would not have tackled otherwise, shaping me into a more focused and driven person. In many ways, weed gave me the clarity I needed to discover my real passions and commit to them. The bad. At the same time, getting high felt so incredible that almost everything else started to lose its appeal. When I was high, life was fascinating. I felt like I could delve deeper into any topic, figure out solutions to problems, and see the world in a richer, more vibrant way. But once the high wore off, I felt empty and dull, like a blank shell of myself. I began to believe that the only time the world had any color was when I was high. My social anxiety also worsened. I would stay in my room to avoid feeling self-conscious, even though I knew I needed to get out more. When it got rough, I was an engineering student with big dreams, yet I found myself cutting study time short just to chase that high, directly clashing with my goal of excelling in my field. I needed to work on projects, prepare for interviews, and start applying for jobs. During the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic, being at home all day made it much easier to give in to temptation, right when this was one of the most crucial periods for a university student. Everything I had worked so hard for led up to this moment, and it was heartbreaking to realize that the same substance that once gave me clarity was now sabotaging my ambitions. Recognizing addiction, I knew things were spiraling when I could not stop, even as I promised myself every night that it would be the last time. I would get as high as possible, tell myself I would quit tomorrow, and then fall back into the same cycle. Quitting for good. After about 6 years of on and off use, I finally quit around 4 years ago. It was undoubtedly one of the hardest things I have ever done. At this point, I do not plan on going back because I doubt I would have the willpower to quit again, especially now that I have achieved many of the goals we'd originally helped me discover. Story 12. Cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. I ended up in the emergency room and almost had kidney failure due to dehydration and constant vomiting that did not stop until I quit. Story 13. I was smoking an ounce every 2 to 3 days. It affected every part of my life for more than 24 years. I started when I was 12 and really did not know any different. I was not even getting that high. I was just maintaining a constant feeling of blah. I only got high the first time I smoked each day. I only smoked blunts, game cigarillos, so the nicotine was another vice I had to quit at the same time. I smoked around 14 blunts a day and used roaches mixed in with the weed to conserve bud. I noticed I was angry all the time when I was not smoking, such as at work. It was a bad time. It has been about a year and a half and I feel great. A lot of good things have happened in that time. It was hard to quit both habits at once. I tried smoking once about 6 months into sobriety and I was so high I absolutely hated it. So here I am. Story 14. Smoked from high school in the 1990s until around 2010, sometimes daily, sometimes every other day. I had a hard time applying myself and lived in a nostalgic, dreamlike state with occasional panic attacks. When I quit, I realized I had been sabotaging my work and life potential by avoiding truths and staying numb for over a decade. After I quit, I started excelling at my profession and moved from hourly pay to a good salary. I got married, started a family, and now I am present for my wife and children. I smoked a couple of times over the past nearly 15 years while catching up with friends, a puff here or there, but I am too conscious of what is at stake and of my responsibilities as a husband and father to embrace that lifestyle. Some people need it, and some use it without it affecting them as it affects me. Everyone is different, and I respect that. For me, to be present, feel raw emotion, and show up for my own life, smoking or eating edibles was not conducive to my personal and professional success. So I stopped. Maybe one day, when the kids are gone, I will have a small stash for social gatherings or an evening unwinding ritual. For the moment, I am sober and engaged in my own reality. It is much more rewarding to be present and self-aware. It feels good to feel things on a level playing field. Story 15. 2 reasons. Overeating, and South Park's point that smoking weed makes you feel okay about doing nothing. Time wasted is a terrible thing. Story 16. When I was young, it was fun. As I got older, it made my brain focus on negative, stressful things. It is just not enjoyable anymore. Story 17. Wild, steep, cooing, spectacular, fly, salt, historical, absorbed, innocent, file. Story 18. My brother started smoking, and it sent him into a deep psychosis that he is still in after several years. It triggered his schizophrenia. I was a heavy user for several years, and it no longer did me any good. I used it as a crutch and to self-medicate. Hearing the story of what he experienced during his psychotic episode was bone-chilling. I officially quit the next day and have not smoked since. It has been about a year and a half. Story 19. Reduced anxiety and overthinking, better sleep, improved brain function, increased financial well-being, greater ability to have and remember dreams, improved problem-solving. Story 20. I realized that apart from smoking, I had nothing in common with my friends. Story 21. I liked how alcohol made me feel like a real person with emotions, but I obviously could not drink often. A friend suggested cannabis and I smoked a little. However, every time I used it, I experienced an extreme fight-or-flight response. I wanted to crawl into the smallest, darkest space possible. It was not fun. I felt like I was being hunted. Story 22. I have smoked cannabis almost every day for 16 years, and I have only recently realized it is making me somewhat anxious. I have not given it up, but I probably should. Story 23. Increased anxiety. This can cause a disconnection from reality. For example, a person may not be able to feel things correctly, and their sense of touch may be altered. Story 24. Everywhere I went, it felt like the perfect place to get high. Watching a movie, eating at a restaurant, or visiting a theme park. I went on a mate's holiday to Portugal. 2 of our friends are from there. Their parents were on holiday, so we had their house for 2 weeks. I spent the first half day trying to get weed. My Portuguese friends, who did not even smoke, tried to find some for me. Then it dawned on me. I was with my closest friends. The weather was perfect with clear blue skies, and we were a 15-minute walk from a beautiful beach. I did not get any weed and just enjoyed the place and the company. Quitting was probably the hardest thing I have ever done. I smoked every day, and while it is not physically addictive, I was definitely addicted to it. The biggest change was having dreams again. I realized that while I smoked regularly, I did not dream. I have much more money now. I go out and do things instead of staying home and getting high. I almost did not go on the holiday. I was lucky to have friends who insisted I go. It was the best decision I ever made. I do not miss it anymore. Story 25. I used to smoke every day. It made me a bit paranoid, anxious, and antisocial, but I was fine with that because I was stoned constantly. This continued for about 13 years. At 28, I decided to go back to school. I quickly realized I could not function or learn properly, so I cut back to smoking only once a week on Friday evenings. The problem was that after not smoking all week, I would get way too stoned from just one joint. It made me very paranoid and anxious to the point that I could not enjoy it. I could not even lie down and close my eyes because my mind would be racing while I tried to relax, as if it were being pulled in two different directions, and my heart would be beating as if it were going 1,000,000 miles per hour. That is the opposite of how you want to feel when you use cannabis. So I quit. It has been 15 years since I last used cannabis, and 11 years since I last smoked a cigarette. Story 26. I loved getting stoned, but I didn't really like being stoned. Story 27. I had no real life and a lazy mindset, which made me very antisocial. I would go home from work, get stoned, lock myself in, and spend weekends the same way. The change in mindset after I stopped is so much better. Now I go hiking and camping and live a more fulfilling life. Story 28. I had convinced myself it was helping my anxiety, but then it started to make it so much worse, to the point where I would panic every time. It was not a problem when I was in my teens, but once I got into my 20s, it was like my body decided it was time to stop. Story 29. I had a severe panic attack after smoking and decided I never want to do that again. You know that feeling when your breathing goes on manual and you have to consciously take breaths? I experienced that, but with my heartbeat. I had to focus on keeping my heart beating or it felt like it might stop. And it terrified me. Never again. Story 30. It made my anxiety much worse. I thought I was self-medicating, but it was amplifying the problem. I understand that there are strains that can help, but here in Ireland we do not have the same access to variety as other places. Story 31. I reached the point where it only made me hungry and lazy. Story 32. I hate the way it makes me feel. In my teens and 20s, I loved it. When I turned 30, it was no longer enjoyable. Story 33. I smoked daily for over 10 years. I reached a point when I realized it did not add anything to my life. When I was high, I did nothing but sit and watch television instead of doing something constructive. I turned 30 and decided to quit. My friends were shocked and admired my willpower, and they thought I would relapse after a few weeks. It has been 2 years now. Story 34. It robs you of your dreams unless your dream is to sit on the couch and do nothing. Story 35. It became hard to find, so I did not bother. After that period without it, anytime I tried it, I had severe panic attacks. Story 36. I had a child. That's about it. I just want to look into his eyes and for him to see clearly. Story 37. Anxiety, cognitive impairment, depressive symptoms, low self-confidence, lung problems, constant cough, and a stuffy nose. This list can continue, but these are the main ones. Story 38. I'm sure this is an unpopular opinion, but it was a gateway for me personally to hard drugs. Call me a drug abuse resistance education poster child. But it's true. I started smoking when I was 13 and became a daily smoker by 16. I began experimenting with other drugs, including lysergic acid diethylamide, psychedelic mushrooms, and cocaine, and I chased the sleepy feeling that cannabis gave me. I became a full-fledged opioid addict by 18 and got sober at 21 after 4 trips to rehab. I love being sober. It gets hard sometimes, since most of my friends are daily smokers, but for the most part it doesn't bother me to say no. Story 39. It made me very paranoid during the late stages of my addiction, especially about my health. I smoked daily for about 4 to 5 years and quit 7 weeks ago. Story 40. I am pregnant and will abstain from cannabis for at least another year while breastfeeding and pumping. This is the longest tolerance break I have ever had. Story 41. My partner became pregnant, and I decided I did not want to be arrested and spend any of my child's life in jail. It was still illegal in my country. This was 21 years ago. I still miss it, but seeing my child grow up was so worth it. Story 42. It made me so unmotivated that I no longer wanted to obtain more marijuana. Story 43. It was my ex. She began smoking regularly, which led to several psychotic incidents. I had to take our son away, and she was institutionalized. Story 44. Motivation. It was hard to admit that it had killed my drive to do anything. Since I quit, I picked up paddleboarding and weightlifting, became more social, and started eating better. I am in the best shape of my life at 40. I am not anti-weed. It is an all-or-nothing thing for me, and it is not a healthy choice. Story 45. I became homeless because I had no desire to do anything. I eventually realized it was time to steer my life toward something more meaningful. Story 46. Potheads ruined weed. I used to be able to smoke a spliff, have fun, and get things done. Nowadays you take a toke, raid the fridge and pantry, and then pass out in bed. Where is the fun in that? The hybrids that have been around are just way too strong. Story 47. I know we are supposed to say marijuana is not addictive, but when I found myself needing to smoke every day just to get through, I do not know what else to call it. Story 48. I stopped when I started a job that required concentration. Even smoking a little before sleep caused brain fog for the entire next day. Story 49. Paranoia and anxiety became much worse. I was content with doing nothing. My day revolved around finishing my work and smoking. Many of my friends were the same. My sleep quality was poor. I began working out full-time but could not manage my diet because smoking triggered intense hunger. I frequently skipped workouts to smoke. I felt I had to choose between a fulfilled life and getting high. This is a personal anecdote. Story 50. I do not have definitive proof, but I believe it started affecting my heart. I was a daily smoker for years. I smoked every day after work and all afternoon and evening on weekends. I felt it helped lower my stress and helped me relax after a rough day. In the summer of 2023, I began having frequent heart palpitations. I did not think much of it because I have always had palpitations, but this time they happened every day, multiple times a day. I started feeling extreme discomfort in my neck and shoulders while walking my dog and felt my heart racing. I ignored it because I was uninsured. A few days later, while building Lego with my son, I suddenly felt my heart racing, could not breathe normally, and felt like I was going to pass out. I checked my heart rate and it was very high. I went to the emergency room. After waiting for hours and having blood tests, they found elevated troponin levels, high enough to indicate a problem with my heart but not enough to confirm a full heart attack. I stayed overnight for observation. It was really scary, and I could not quit immediately. I weaned myself off. I do not smoke daily anymore, only occasionally when I have the house to myself, maybe once every few months. I take a few hits from a weak joint. I feel much better. I no longer get palpitations and have had no further heart issues. More than anything, it made me realize how much I was smoking and how much more harm than good it was doing. Story 51. I used to smoke socially a couple of times a week, but a close family member had a wake and bake habit. After they quit, they almost immediately began having paranoid rants, claiming secret government agents were watching them and planning to frame them for murder. They were constantly looking over their shoulder, convinced that everyone on the street was watching and that popular meme pages were sending coded messages about them and their downfall. Seeing them like that made me decide that, even if cannabis did not cause it, I was probably better off without a drug that increased my anxiety. Story 52. I became pregnant. Since my baby was born, I have not had time to do anything. Story 53. For the sake of our son, he and I left his mother because she was using hard drugs. I passed my hair follicle test in court and she did not. Story 54. I smoked daily for years. I had to quit for a month, and when I tried smoking again, I had a severe panic attack. After that, I had a panic attack every time I smoked, so I could not do it anymore. For about 1 to 2 years after I stopped, I experienced derealization and severe social anxiety. Recently, I bought some hemp bud because I still miss smoking, and it works well. Now I can smoke with friends who use marijuana without getting high. Story 55. Anxiety, weight gain from the munchies, and money problems. The cost of cannabis and food really adds up, laughing a lot. Story 56. Too much can rob you of your ambition but can also be great for creativity. It is all about moderation. Story 57. I am 41 and have smoked every day since I was about 22. I do not want to quit and do not need to, but if I were to quit it would be because of the cost and missed dreams. I do not have any and would not mind one sometime. Story 58. In my 60s, it is a pain, anxiety, and boredom reliever. Salves, creams, bath salts, and sleep gummies are the best. Story 59. I moved to a country where it is illegal, expensive, and difficult to find. That was decades ago. If I visited another country, I would like to have a tokay or two, but I am not sure if that will be possible for the next few years. Story 60. I experienced extreme anxiety and panic attacks after using cannabis every day for 14 years. My body and mind had enough. I do not think I will ever go back. Story 61. I was a daily smoker for about 7 years. My first child was born a couple of weeks ago. My partner barely tolerated my smoking during the pregnancy, and when we brought our daughter home, she said, "You are not smoking anymore." As much as I love smoking, I realized that losing my partner and daughter would not mix well with marijuana. Story 62. I began to feel faint and unreal when I was stoned, which caused anxiety. Story 63. I smoked for 18 years and quit 2 months ago. It made me passive and stopped caring about my own life. I had a hard time keeping my place clean, going shopping, or doing anything for myself. All I did was come home from work and smoke until I passed out. I used it to ignore my mental health issues. I wanted a better life, and I realized cannabis caused most of my problems and was actively preventing me from fixing myself. Story 64. My wife became pregnant 4 months ago. It is not appropriate for me to smoke when she cannot. Now I am not sure I will ever smoke again by choice. My thinking is much clearer now. Story 65. I was given a blunt that had been laced, and it ruined my life. I will never smoke anything again. Story 66. Brain fog. Mostly. I felt like I could not remember anything and was living in a daze. No one talks about the transition after quitting. There is a period of feeling empty or bored when food, sex, and nearly everything in life feels bland because you are so reliant on the enhancement effect it had. Story 67. I had a really bad panic attack once. It scared me into quitting smoking. Story 68. It gave me anxiety attacks, which was the opposite of what I intended. Dosage did not matter. Even a small amount increased my anxiety. I was not having fun. Story 69. I took an edible and went to a comedy show, but I was terrified someone was going to detonate a bomb in the building. Kind of ruined the whole experience for me. Story 70. It caused me to overeat so much that I felt I could not control it. Story 71. Rapid eye movement sleep. Cannabis prevents restorative sleep when used daily. After years of daily cannabis smoking, I began to feel exhausted after 8 hours of sleep. I stopped smoking, experienced vivid dreams, and had much better sleep after a few weeks. Story 72. I watched my college friends go from people with concrete hopes, dreams, and goals to people who sit on the couch around the clock, smoking and barely scraping by driving for DoorDash, still living in the same mold-filled apartment we shared more than 5 years ago. I realized I absolutely could not let that happen to me. We all started experimenting with marijuana during our freshman year. Story 73. It was increasing my anxiety and fueling my drinking. I went 5 days without it and immediately felt better, so I quit cold turkey. It also helped me stop drinking. I just passed my 1-year cannabis-free milestone and will reach my alcohol-free milestone on February 1st. Story 74. My husband helped me realize I don't need it to feel happy or loved. By making me feel cared for, he showed that the weed was distracting me rather than giving me what I thought I needed. Story 75. I smoked marijuana every day for 7 years. I tried seriously to stop 3 times. Once to get a better job, once to join the military, and once for another job, but I relapsed each time. When I met my wife, she did not like that I smoked. She would not say so directly, but I could tell. I had to choose between giving up marijuana and losing the love of my life. I chose to stop. It has been 2 years since I last smoked. Story 76. For reference, I'm in my mid-40s. When I was much younger, from about 16 to 20 years old, I was a heavy pot user. Wake and bake was as natural to me then as coffee is in the morning now. Around age 20, I just got bored with it. Not because I thought it was a waste of time or because of any moral objection, but I simply lost interest. Years later, in my early to mid-30s, a roommate was going out of the country for a bit and gave me a joint since he could not take it with him. I took it, and a few days later, with nothing else going on, I decided to try it. It triggered one of the worst panic attacks I have ever had. For about half an hour, I thought I was going to have to go to the emergency room, which in retrospect was unnecessary. It finally subsided, and I was moderately stoned for a bit before passing out. I tried it again a few weeks later, and the same thing happened. I have not touched it since, which is a shame because now that it is legal, I think it could go a long way toward helping me cut back on my alcohol problem. Story 77. What are the odds of this being the top question? My user history will show that this is all I have obsessed over for the past 2 weeks. Short story. Severe asthma scare, which I thought was from vaping, but it turned out to be a virus that resolved. During the days I stayed sober, it broke the addiction spell and routine. 12 days of sobriety changed me after 5 years of daily highs. I smoked today. My intention was never to stop, but I will not be the same again. Maybe in the summer I will smoke more. Story 78. I smoked every day for about 10 years. One day, after smoking, I felt like worms were crawling in my brain and I was sick for about a week. That was the last time I smoked. Story 79. I wanted the fog to lift and my brain to be clear, so I could experience my life fully. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.